Thoughtlessly excusing games in ways like the title of this video does not only prevents the medium of video games from advancing, but also signals to gamers that age merits tenure. Games don't change as they get older, so how can a mechanic become better simply because its release date is further in the past? If the game deserved criticism at the time of its release, what has changed from then to now that grants it immunity? What about the passage of time builds up a shield against the critical eye? Among all the things anyone can say about video games in general, this is the second most absurd and harmful thing I've ever heard. I'll tell you the first. One of my friends once told me over lunch that 2D games simply cannot be as good as 3D ones, period. Anyway, please take notice that this genre of comment about age is exclusive to the universe of games. Has Beethoven or Van Gogh been above criticism simply because they're old or the first to do something? The mind behind a comment like this reveals an analytical mind that has very little purchase on what's important to consider when understanding the details of a game. I'll begin by creating as full of a defense as I can conjure on the topic, and then go about dismantling and explaining why it's incorrect to propose such a thing and that it's harmful. I'll present them in the form of 4 points. 1. Because this game was the first to implement this aspect, it doesn't deserve criticism. It innovated this idea, so there was nothing that it was improving upon and nothing that it could improve upon. For example, people use this logic to defend Z-targeting from Ocarina of Time. 2. This thing revolutionized the game industry, and games today still use it, so it's best to criticize the contemporary versions of it. Many people view the camera system in Mario 64 this way. 3. This game was created in a time when not much was known about game design. There really weren't university degrees that you could get or many books that you could read to educate yourself. A significant portion of game design was trial by fire. Now that there is some precedent and tradition in the field, it can be taught and executed more reliably and with more confidence knowing that these tactics will work. Hardware, including the controllers and cartridge/disk memory, in the past was much more limited, so less could be accomplished and more things were inconvenient. I've never actually heard a defense this cogent before because it usually stops at the assertion, but I made an effort to simulate what this argument might look like if it were developed. People seem to accept the assertion outright, which is why I suspect I haven't heard it developed. So let's look at the many problems it has. What is an old game? How many days or months or years does a game become officially old? 1 year? 2? 5? 10? Where is the line drawn between old and new, antiquity and contemporary? This is the first step to establishing a foundation for the rest of the argument, but because the answer is so unclear, if there even is one, it would be difficult to advance the argument beyond this point. The fact that a game or a mechanic of a game is the first of its kind doesn't give it divine protection either. Unknowingly cherry-picking examples of games that got something right on their first time seems to be the culprit. I'm sure Sonic 06 or Superman 64 or Mary-Kate and Ashley's Sweet 16 License to Drive did something for the first time, but just because they're not heralded as classics, they're now available to be criticized appropriately? Only when something has had significant impact on the industry is it exempt from logic, apparently. If I were the Pope and I announced to the world that all Christian babies henceforth shall be baptized in blessed Mercury, and I'm sure I would be the first to suggest such a thing, should my request remain devoid of criticism simply because I was the first to do so? For point 3, the phrase "ignorance is not innocence" comes to mind. Because the developers of a game had to think for themselves and generate creative solutions to their own problems instead of reading about them, how does that invalidate their work as a subject of criticism? Let's say a stranger on the street asks you for directions and you provide them. After they're well on their way to the supposed destination, you realize the directions you just gave were incorrect and they're going to a different location entirely. Are the directions you just gave correct just because you gave them in the past? They're, dare I say, old? And for the last point, limitation is often the mother of creation. And again, paintbrushes have limitations, yet we don't extend excuses to paintings that use that instrument for the sheer fact that they're using that instrument. In the same vein, certain controllers might have presented unique challenges, but designing something successful around those challenges is what's important. People are biting the hand that feeds them because they clamor for new and original games, especially in the current environment of FPS oversaturation, but in the same breath condemn those who want to criticize games. It is the analysis of all games, old and new, that reveal new aspects of game design theory, and preventing this analysis arbitrarily limits what we can learn from past mistakes and successes, and actively pushes us off the shoulders of the giants on which we stand.